Gary. Are you here to interview me?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
Did you come over and sit down on the couch?
All righty. There. How's that? Let me arrange my back. So, and pull my skirt down. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Let me adjust the camera for just a second. Okay. Well, what's today's date?
Today is the 29th of July,
That's right.
1995.
And we're here today to interview my mother, Thelma Goodfleisch, and my name is Gary Ploetz. And, okay, let's see. Now...
Well, why don't I start it off for you?
Okay.
Well, I was born in Pascagoula, Mississippi in 1918 in a great big storm. And my doctor, or my mother's doctor, didn't know my name. He always called me his storm baby. And I could be walking down the street and I'd be 15 years old and he'd say, well, here comes my storm baby. And I doubt if Dr. Kell ever knew my name. Besides, he had delivered all 11 of Mama's children.
Uh-huh.
And
one of them was named after him, right?
my brother Kell was named after Dr. Kell. And my sister Betty was named after his wife.
Oh, really?
Well, they were real good friends of my folks.
Uh-huh.
And so Dr. Kell used to, I can remember when I was about 10 or 9 years old, there were only 2 doctors in our town. Dr. Kell would come down and say, he always called Mama Belle. Isabel, he'd say, I'm going to take a nap on your couch. I am so tired. So I'd come home from school and there's old Dr. Kell parked on the couch in the living room.
So he'd hide out at y'all's house?
He'd hide out, yeah. Of course, Papa was there too, but...
And he and your dad were good friends?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were real good friends.
Now, in 1918 on the Gulf Coast, wasn't there a flu epidemic in the year?
Mama said that when I was born, they were hauling people out, 6 in a neighborhood at one time. And it was a great big epidemic. So a lot of people died and things like that.
And where were your parents' names?
Well, my mother's name was Susan Isabel Hockley. And I think she was born in Ballabatry, Alabama.
Uh-huh.
And my father's name was Albert Antone Bosarge. And it was pronounced Bosarge, but nobody could pronounce it, so they started calling it Bosarge. So,
who were his parents?
Well, gosh, now I can't tell you his father's name. That's terrible, but I can't tell you his mother's name. But he was brought up by his grandparents. Mm-hmm. He and his brother Eddie.
Uh-huh.
And they had a big restaurant on the river in Pascagoula.
On the Pascagoula River?
Yeah, and so his father died. He was a sea captain, and he was drowned at sea, I imagine in a storm or something like that. And so his grandmother, well, she lived with them after
his mother.
After my grandfather died, she lived with the grandparents.
Uh-huh.
But she grieved herself to death.
Huh.
So she got pneumonia and I guess died.
So Albert and Eddie were raised by their grandparents.
Yes, and then as they got older, well, see, they also had a restaurant. Uh-huh. See, they had a restaurant, a seafood restaurant, and I guess it was the restaurant on the river. And they had big boats and men that went out and caught fresh seafood and brought it in. Mm-hmm. And so I imagine that's how my father got his start. And because as they got older, they worked for their grandfather.
Uh-huh.
And so I imagine when they died, they took over the grandfather's business. And then my dad had, a seafood business all year. He also had big boats that went out and got the
He was a shrimper. He had shrimp boats.
Yeah, he had big shrimp boats, and then in oyster season, the men went out and caught oysters and stuff. And we had, they opened the oysters, and we had a retail shop.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he did.
So he had shrimp boats. Your dad had shrimp boats, and he had a seafood shop in town.
Yeah.
What about your mother's parents? Do you know who they were?
My mother's mother, yeah. Her name, she was, I guess, right around 5 foot tall.
Uh-huh.
And she had long black hair and big black sparkly eyes. And she used to love to go to these holy roller churches.
Uh-huh.
And she was a Catholic, but she liked to go when the tent, during the time I was little, they had these people, even Billy Graham used to go around with his in a tent before he got his big start. And so, and I think she
Tent
went
revival, right?
Huh?
The tent revival.
Yeah. And so she'd see these people all, and my grandmother loved that, but her husband had died.
Uh-huh.
So, in fact, Grandma's house, when we were down and when we went back to reminisce and everything and go to see the house where I was born and all that type of thing, we also saw my grandmother's house.
Hmm.
Can you imagine that house being that old?
Really? So you remember she was still alive when you were young?
Oh, yeah. Louise and I used to go to church with her.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. She'd come up and she'd say, she called Mama Belle, too. See, Mama's name was Susan Isabel. And she'd come up and she'd say, Belle, can the girls go with me down? Because she didn't want to walk by herself down to church. And so she used to wear, I never did see my grandmother in a short dress. She always wore these skirts and blouses, and the skirt always came down to her ankles. And but she was pretty. She'd take that hair and braid it and roll it around her head, And she was really a real pretty woman. She died kind of young because she got pneumonia.
And what was her name?
Her name was Sarah.
Sarah?
Sarah Cecilia.
And do you remember what her maiden name was?
Hockley.
No, that was her married name, right?
No, that was her maiden name.
No, that was your mother's maiden name.
Yeah.
But what was her mother's maiden name?
Oh, gosh.
Don't know.
I can't remember that. But I can remember her.
And do you remember what was the house that you grew up in? What was the street address?
It was called Herrick Street.
Herrick?
Herrick, Herrick.
What was the house number?
I don't know, something like 326 or something. Gary, you're talking about back, I was born in that house. Yeah. And we had a kitchen that went all the way across the back of the house. Mm-hmm. And the bedrooms on each side of the house. We had a living room and 4 bedrooms and all that kind of stuff.
Now, didn't your dad own or your family own the house behind it, and y'all switched houses with the people that lived behind you?
Well, my father and Allie Lanier were real good friends, and so his daughter Ivan was burned to death. And somehow or another, her mother told her to go start the fire. During those days, we all had great big ranges, and everybody cooked on it, but everybody had to make a fire to start the cooking. Mm-hmm. And so it was time for supper. So she told Ivan to go in and make a fire. And somehow or another, her brother had put gasoline down instead of coal oil. Mm-hmm. And Ivan threw a match to this gasoline, and it all went up in her face and burned her and everything. And I think she lived about 3 or 4 days, and she died. Well, her mother wouldn't go back in the house. And since Allie Lanier and Papa were good friends, he said, come on, Albert Bosarge, let's you and I trade houses. So Papa did. And I don't know, I think there was a little money exchanged, but not very much. And because Allie Lanier had a big house. And so that's how we happened to live where, well, you weren't born, I mean, but the other kids went there, Sherry and Charlie and all of them.
Well,
And
tell me, you had 10 brothers and sisters, right?
yes, but one of them died when she was 9 months old.
Oh, is that right?
And she had red hair
Huh.
and blue eyes. Because you see, my grandmother had two sisters and 2 brothers. Wait a minute. I think she had 3 brothers. She was a brunette, and she had a brother that was a brunette. And she had a sister that was a redhead, and also a brother that was a redhead.
Hmm.
She also had a sister that was a blonde.
And then your mother, didn't she have?
She had red hair until she was 12 years old.
Hmm.
Then she fell out of a tree, and I guess they, during those days, they cooked beef, boiled beef, and gave her the bloody stuff out of the beef, and that was the iron she took.
Uh-huh.
And she took that iron and everything, and she never would eat beef after that.
Hmm.
She'd eat ham and fish, but she wouldn't eat any beef.
And her hair turned black?
Yeah, and she said that during those days, she said that, you know, people would think you would dye your hair or something, and you didn't dye your hair. So she wore a bonnet until her hair grew out, and when it grew out, it was red. Can you imagine?
And so, wasn't your oldest brother Levert?
Yeah, well, he was the chief of police in Pascagoula,
Uh-huh.
and he's the one that caught Pretty Boy Floyd.
Yeah, and his name, what was Levert's nickname?
Pete,
Pistol Pete?
Pistol Pete.
I think I remember when I was a kid, he showed me his pearl-handled pistols when we were
Yeah,
down there.
yeah.
And so, do you know how he caught Pretty Boy Floyd?
Well, nobody, you know, he had a lot of policemen under him, and nobody would go out for Pretty Boy Floyd, so he went out himself, and he found him, and he brought him in, and Pretty Boy Floyd was that's the only time I went to Pascagoula High School was when I was a freshman, and they had Pretty Boy Floyd, and all the girls wanted to go down to the courthouse to see Pretty Boy Floyd, and so I sneaked away with the rest of the girls, and we all cut class, and we all lined up in the in the courthouse to see Pretty Boy Floyd. And so he came out. He was a good-looking fella. He came out and he saw these young kids waiting to see what he looked like, and so he bowed like this to us, and he turned around and he said, "Well, girls," he said, "this is what I look like." And the old judge, he beat on the thing with his hammer. And so my brother came home and he said, "I was never so embarrassed in my life. A lot of the schoolgirls came down to see Pretty Boy Floyd, and I looked, and there's my little sister sitting there." And Mama said, "Did you cut class and go?" And I said, "Yeah, everybody else did." Anyway, she kind of giggled behind Pete's. She didn't mind because everybody else had gone down. She probably wished she had gone down herself.
So who was and then after Levert was Aunt Sis?
Yeah, see, it was Sis, and Sis was married to Johnny. Well, she married very young, Johnny Foster, and then he died. Oh, I think when. See, by this time, I went to live with your Aunt Keith. I went to live with your Aunt Keith when I was 12, and Keith had married Captain Ralph Leake. And he was in the Coast Guard. And so before that, she was a divorcee living at home with 2 girls. And so then she married the only real eligible man in town with 2 children. So they went to Key West, and when they came back, of course, Keith was the apple of Papa's eye. And Keith was always a real beautiful woman. So Keith said, "Why don't you let Thelma go with us?" And Mama said, "Absolutely not." Well, she went to Papa and she said, "Why don't you let Thelma go with us?" And about this time, I heard about them going to St. Petersburg, and of course I jumped up and down and wanted to go, and I was kind of a spoiled brat too. And Papa spoiled all of us. Anyway, so I said, "Well, I will go and I'll come home in the summertime." Well, I did. I kept my word. I went to school at junior high school, It was called Mirror Lake Junior High, Girls Junior High. And the boys were across the lake. Of course, the boys used to come over at lunch, and we'd play shuffleboard, and most of the time we played volleyball. And but anyway, I went to school there 2 years, but in the summertime I went back to Pascagoula and hung out at the beach all day and all that type of thing. And then in the wintertime, Keith was right back on the phone wanting me to come back. So she'd come home in the summer and pick me up.
So why did she want you to come live with her?
Well, you know, she had lived at home for about 3 years or something like that with Doris and Elaine. And we just always played together. You know, I played with Doris and Elaine, and of course when they left I was just really lonesome. And of course I had friends of my own, but it wasn't like I used to take them to the movies and you know, and all that type of thing. Hung around with them all the time. I don't know. She just wanted me to go.
And so then
you know how big sister, and we lived in a one-horse town, and the idea of going to St. Petersburg was a big deal for me, you know. So I went to St. Petersburg, and then when I came home, I was a freshman in high school. And then, of course, my nephew, Johnny Foster, was, I think he was a grade behind me, because he's a year younger than I am. Anyway, Johnny went on, and he made the highest marks that was ever made in that high school. Can you imagine that?
He became a doctor, right?
And he's a doctor in Foley, Alabama, and now his daughter's a doctor, and his son is Attorney General for Alabama. He's a lawyer. He's an Attorney General for Alabama appointed by Clinton. So they all Democrats. In fact, the whole family was Democrats. Mama always said, boy, when poor times would come along, it was because the Republicans had gotten in. When the good times and the money was plentiful was when the Democrats were in. So she was a Democrat too.
So after your freshman year, did you go and live with Aunt Keith again?
Yeah, I went to Charleston, South Carolina. So I went to another girls' school. I didn't go into anything but girls' school except 1 year. And that's when I was in Pascagoula, and they had one of these Who's Who's contests. And I won for having the best looking legs in high school when I was a freshman. Can you imagine?
So in this period, this is when your father died also, right? When you were in Charleston?
Yeah, in my senior year.
Your senior year? And what happened to him?
He had a heart attack when he was 54 years old and died.
Was it at home when it happened?
Yeah. And he thought he had a bad case of indigestion. So he walked all the way around the block to my oldest brother's house. And they gave him some kind of medicine for indigestion. And he came back home and fell on the floor. And my mother was real sick. And so, well, then I came home. Of course, I didn't, on the way home, I didn't know whether he had died or whether she had died. And I got home and it was, he had died.
Oh, they sent word to
And, you know,
Charleston?
Oh, they called my sister right away. And she always regretted that she didn't, you know, come to that funeral. But I was there, and during this time, I don't even think they had a funeral home in Pascagoula. Seems like to me Papa was laid out in our living room. Of course, they embalmed him and all that kind of stuff. But if they had a funeral home, I didn't know anything about it. Because during those days, people used to use their living room. And I remember, of course, I was pretty young, but I can remember people bringing in a lot of food and all that type of thing. And I can't remember the burial or anything like that. I guess we were all kind of in shock, because he was, you know, he was a real fun-loving, just like your dad.
Didn't you tell me he had a big stable of horses behind the house?
Yeah, he always had horses. Yeah. And when I was little, he bought a Shetland pony, and we used to. At one of the funerals, that's when you see everybody in Pascagoula. They all come for the wake, like an Irish wake. And So you see all the neighbors that you knew back when you were a little girl and all that type of thing. And one of the ladies came up to me and she said, "Are you Thelma?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, I never will forget you and that long black curly hair, wearing your little old panties and riding that Shetland pony." And I said, "Wearing my panties?" "Yeah." She said, "You never wore any clothes. It was in the summertime. You used to ride that pony in just a little pair of panties." So I must have been about 6 or something like that. And but we all rode the pony, and but Papa always had at least 3 horses, and he had to have those Palominas. That's the only kind of horse he wanted. You know, he was quite a dude. He wouldn't wear anything but a Stetson hat and floor shine shoes, and he had his thing that he was, because Susan said to me the other day, "Mother, why do you put so much emphasis on how you look?" And I said, "Well, actually that's your only message to the world, and your dad used to say that, but my father used to say that too. And he wouldn't wear anything except the best clothes and all that type of thing." So I would say that nowadays they'd call him kind of a dude.
Now, tell me, and so in your senior year, your father died, and then you went back to Charleston. Didn't you tell me that it was kind of like a finishing school that you went to?
Yeah, well, of course we had, you know, we had a class where you had to learn to be a lady, you know, how to place your feet, and how to eat, and how to greet people, and, you know, just all that type of thing, yeah.
Did you play any sports?
Oh yeah, I played 4 years of basketball, and then I also played, I think, 2 years of softball after I got out of high school. And then after I got out of high school, I didn't go to college, but my mother insists that I take, I was telling my sister Betty this morning about you coming over here, and I said, I didn't go to college, but not too many girls in my day went to college, actually. And I couldn't go to college because I had to help my mother. She was still running that business. And Cal was younger than I, you know, about 18 months younger than I was. And so I helped her, but she also insisted that I go to business school. And I was telling Betty about going over to Mrs. Beckham's, and she said, "Well, I can remember you going over there." She said, "I was little, but I can remember it." So I went to business school. And then in Pascagoula, of course, you'd have a heck of a time. Everybody that had a store had a daughter and a son that worked in it, so you had a heck of a time getting a job. So, but anyway, I kept books for Olin Mills.
Where was that?
Pascagoula.
In Pascagoula?
And I worked for a dentist, and you know, I was his receptionist, and I was also his assistant. He was just a young dentist by the name of Thompson. And I don't know if he's still in Pascagoula or not, but he was had just opened a practice and all that type of thing. And Doris, of course, when I was home for the summer, Doris was home too.
And that's Aunt Keith's daughter.
Oldest daughter, yeah. She's dead now. And I had 7 children, where Doris had 8.
And when did you go back to live with Keith? You went back to live with Keith again after a while, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where was she? Was that in Philadelphia then?
No, Doris and I went to Miami, and she met this fellow.
Now, how did y'all get to Miami? Or
well,
why did y'all go to Miami?
We heard that in the summertime that all the working girls could live in the hotels just to keep the hotels open. So we decided we'd go down there. Louise, my other sister that's older than I, the 3 of us went down to Miami. And listen, Keith was constantly, wouldn't leave me alone. When I was at Olin Mills, I had to come down to Miami where she was. This was later on. But during this time, no, was that, yeah, I'm trying to think. It's hard to go back and think of all the things that went on in this time. But anyway, the 3 of us went to Miami, and we decided we'd go down there for a couple of weeks. Well, we had saved our money and everything to go down there, and so seems like to me that Keith was living in St. Petersburg, and we went down to Miami, and we were just going to be gone for a short time. 2 weeks is what we...
And how old are you now?
Oh, I don't know, about 18, something like that. And so Mama sold her business, and she sold the boats, and she sold the rakes, and she sold those rakes and everything were all that equipment was real big, and so anyway, you know, she was pretty self-supporting. So we went down. I mean, she owned her own house and everything like that. And of course now it's hard to go back, but we went down there, and Doris, well, Louise met this lawyer first, and then Doris was a little devil. She kind of chiseled in on Louise, and so she did the same thing to me. But anyway, we used to laugh about it, you know, and so Doris really had a crush on this man, and he had a crush on Doris too. So Doris was, I guess I must have been 18, 19. Doris was about 17 or 18, I don't remember, somewhere around there. She was pretty young, because Keith threw a fit when she was married Bill Kissel. And they were riding back and forth and after, and he had a beautiful sports car that with the top down and everything, and made a big impression on Doris, you know. So she married him, and then after that I had to go to Philadelphia because Keith was worried about Doris, and I had to go up there and see what was going on and all that type of
So
thing.
where were you working when you were in Miami?
We did, well, I worked later in Miami.
Oh. So you went down there for a few weeks to vacation and hang out in the hotels.
And the beach, that's what we went for, the beach, see. Now, we were all pretty young, but when I went back to Miami, it was because your dad said that he was coming through Miami.
Yeah.
And
well, don't get to that yet. Let's go. So you went to Philadelphia to stay with Keith. She called you up and wanted you to come up there.
not Keith, Doris.
Oh.
Doris married this Bill Kissel. And so Keith didn't hear from her real regular and all that kind of stuff. And she wanted to know what was going on up there. So she called me, and here I was working for Olin Mills.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I want you to come down, I want you to go to Philadelphia. And I said, I can't, I've got a job. Oh, you can always pick up a job. Now, I want you to go up there and find out what's going on. So that's how I happened to get to Philadelphia. Well, after I was there for a week.
So where were you staying, with Doris and her new husband?
Yeah, well, this is after a year.
Uh-huh.
You know, a year had passed. And so Keith was real worried about Doris. And so Keith says, I want you to go to Philadelphia and find out what's going on. Well, they were real glad to see me for a week. And so then I said, well, you know, I have to leave. And Doris said, oh, no, listen, please don't go. And right in front of Bill, well, what could he say? And I said, well, Doris, if I'm going to stay, I'll have to get myself a job. So I looked in the paper, and I saw a job open at Kugler's Restaurant, which was a very exclusive restaurant in Philadelphia. So I applied for it. And of course, you had to walk up and down and, you know, kind of like a model deal. And so they hired me. And I'd get on a bus and take it down to the streetcar and get off and get on the elevated train to go to, it was downtown on 15th Street, Philadelphia. And that's where I met more people. That's where I met John Sheridan. And so about this time,
Now, what were you doing for him?
I was a hostess.
Hostess.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd stand at the door and greet people, and people would come in, and I'd take them back to their seats and stuff like that. People would come in and say, Miss, do you know who I am? And I think, lady, I don't care who you are, to myself. But anyway, so John Sheridan was a congressman. And of course, I guess during those days I was pretty good looking. And so one day he came in and he brought 6 bottles of champagne. And he said, I want you to give all these to your host, the other hostesses. And he said, I want you to have dinner with me tonight. And I said, well, I didn't know he was 40 years old, 20 years older than me, or 21.
So
Anyway.
What year is this? About
I don't know.
late 30s, early 40s?
Let's see. I married your dad in 45, August of 45. So this year, you know, I'd be married to your father 50 years. So I want you all to say the 2nd of August. Thought maybe we could all get together and go out to dinner or something.
Okay.
How about that?
Yeah.
So we'll do that.
Okay.
2nd of August. Anyway, so Jack asked
So
me.
is the war on when this is going on? Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
No, I didn't even get out of high school until 37,
Okay.
somewhere around there. It's talking about my diploma. I don't even know where it is. I lost that years ago, moving around. And that beautiful letter I got from Father Verbrugi, saying we were the nicest family he had ever met and all that type of thing. I lost that too. And so one day I didn't lose my head, which
So,
I did.
so where was he? He was a congressman for
In Philadelphia.
in Philadelphia.
Mhm. And so anyway, he was really handsome. He had blue eyes and black curly hair. He was an Irish Catholic. And he found out I was Catholic, and so he used to take me all over. You know, we used to go to a place called Santos, and they had a floor show, and they had an elevated stage, and the stage would be down, and then the stage would go up, you know. And so, of course, during that days, all I wanted to do was dance and have a big time, you know. And I'd say, come on, Jack, this is really a good number. And every place we would go in, they'd all bow and scrape to him, and I thought that was wonderful, you know, because I was a little old country girl from Pascagoula, Mississippi, and going out with this congressman was a big deal. And anyway, when he started talking about, gosh, we could have beautiful children and have about 5 or 6, I thought, good Lord, I don't want to have 5 or 6 children. And my sisters used to say, when I'd meet up with them and all their kids, they used to say, I'd say, now don't touch Aunt Thelma because you'll get my dress dirty. Can you imagine? And then I turned around and anyway, about this time, I was having such a good time in Philadelphia. Anyway, I brought him home and Bill Kissel knew him. And so then all the girls were getting real, the war was on. No, the war was on, Gary, because, because all the girls were going into the defense plants. And so a lot of my friends were saying, oh, you're going to work here, well, why don't we go in and help the war or go into a defense plant? So I worked for Bendix Aviation. And I didn't even know how to go about getting a job there, and so I told Jack, I want to go to, I want to work for Bendix Aviation. And so he got me a job. And he got me a job, and the only one I could get was from 3 to 11 at night, but I didn't care, you know. And they had a lot of girls from the main line. This is debutantes and everything that worked there. And I worked with a girl that had gotten pregnant, and she had to live with her mother and her grandfather, and she used to tell me about them all the time. But anyway, I became an instructor. I got real good. We took the burrs and off of these little tiny pivots off that went into the rate of climb. And the man that was the boss, he kind of took a shine to me. We couldn't wear any makeup or any fingernail polish or anything like that. And so, because they were afraid that some of that would get on the little screws, and we'd have to go in there, and these little screws had to be perfect. We had an inspector that would inspect them. So it wasn't any time at all before I became one of the instructors. And I don't have any strength in my hands to save my life, but I could do stuff like that. And we wore a jeweler's eye loop. Well, one day, don't you know, some policemen came in and hauled our boss off. He was a German spy.
Is that right?
I was never so shocked in my
I
life.
didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm just now reminiscing that.
Huh.
So anyway, I can't remember what happened. I don't know if Mama got sick or what. About this time, Kel had gotten married. And he married Mamie. And they moved in, and that was my exit. You know, I had, and Keith knew that, so they didn't want Mama living by herself in a great big house. Because, see, we had a 4-bedroom house. And it was a big house like this. And anyway, Mamie and Mama became real good friends and everything like that. But I can't remember why I left. I think maybe Keith had something to do with it. I don't know. Whatever Keith wanted, I did, you know.
So where did you go next?
After Philadelphia, it seems like I went back to Pascagoula. And I don't remember what I did. But I think maybe Mama got sick. I don't remember. But I was back and forth. And I told Doris, oh, I know. I told Doris told me, she said, I feel like a prisoner in this house. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, we're going to leave. So Doris and I left together. And Doris, we went back to Keith. I got Doris away from Bill. Because he didn't even want her to open the door and answer the door. And he was, you know, and she had no friends. And he was just like that with her. And I, you know, and she told me, she said, I can't stand it anymore. So we left. And she got a divorce from me.
Did they have any children?
No. Well, they were only married 2 years, I think.
So where was Keith at this time?
St. Petersburg.
There, she was back in St. Petersburg.
Oh, so while I was with Kublis, I'm getting ahead of my story with Jack Sheridan and everything. While I was at Kublis, I was smart enough, but they offered a coffee shop management. And I took that. Like I said, I was always taking classes, but I took that coffee shop management. And that was one of the best things that I ever did. Because when I left and went back, we went to, Keith was in Tampa. By this time, Ralph told her to meet him in Tampa.
So
and he was in the invasion of Normandy and all that, see. It was during the war.
So did you break up with Jack Sheridan?
Yeah, I told him, kissed him off. I told him goodbye. But he was the only guy I dated in Philadelphia the whole time. And so I went down to Tampa. Doris, we got Doris away from Kissel. And she got a divorce. And because she said she felt like a prisoner. So we got back down to Tampa, and in the meantime, so I applied for a job at the Tampa Terrace Hotel as manager. The dining room or the coffee shop. The coffee shop was just a real neat place. It wasn't that big, and you know. So I got it, and I worked from 7 o'clock in the morning until 3:30, I think, something like that. And I met lots of people there. I met Milton Caniff that used to write Terry and the Pirates, and I met this Mr. McCloskey, and he was building the first all-concrete ships, and he was in Tampa, and for the war. And when I said to Mr. McCloskey, "Where are you from?" Of course, being the manager, I'd walk around and was also the hostess, and I'd ask people, how's your food, and, you know, are they giving you good service, and, you know, stuff like that. And so I said, where are you from, Mr. McCloskey? And he said, Philadelphia. And I said, oh, I have a friend in Philadelphia by the name of John Edward Sheridan. And he said, why? He said, he's coming for the all launching of my ships. And they're going to have a big party for him here at the hotel. And I said, you're kidding. He said, no, he's coming. And I said, well, I used to date him. And he said, you did? And he said, well, that's great. Well, anyway, so he told me when he was coming in, but I had no idea that he was coming in that soon. But that same day that he came in is when I met your dad. And Willie and Fred had just gotten back from Guadalcanal, and they had already signed up to go to China. And so I guess the war had been on because he was there 18 months. So anyway, it was in between time, about 10:30, something like that. And Willie and Fred came down, and so we had a great big wide door, you know, from the dining room right across the hall was the great big dining room. So we had a little page boy, and he darted in the door, and he said, calling for Lieutenant so-and-so, calling for Lieutenant so-and-so. And Willie and Fred were busy talking and everything, and I didn't think they heard the page boy. So I went over, and I asked Fred and Willie, I said, do you happen to be Lieutenant so-and-so? No, but what are you doing tonight? I had seen them come in. They had been there a whole week. And anyway, so I started laughing, and they said, well, your dad was so cute and everything, blonde curly hair and blue eyes, and he looked very much like you do, except that he had blonde hair and blonde curls. And he was so cute and nice, but during those times, you could date anybody you wanted to, and I did date a general for a while, but I can't even. It was because Keith's friend had a friend that was a general, and he came in, and I met him, and I went out with him a few times, but he was too old. You know, these old men didn't interest me. All I wanted to do was get out and dance, have a good time. So anyway, during that time, let's see.
So they asked you out.
Yeah, and they said, can you get another girl? And I thought, I'll call Elaine. So I called Elaine, and she said, oh yeah. She said, I'll go out with the captain. And so Willie thought he had a date with me, and I thought I had a date with Fred. And so when they got to the house, Willie said, oh, this is for me when he saw Elaine. You'll have to take the other girl, which was me. And Fred thought he had a date with me all along, and I thought I had a date with Fred. But in the meantime, I'm standing with my back to the door, and Jack Sheridan comes in. Well, I didn't know it was Jack Sheridan.
So when y'all are out on your date?
No, before I got off from work.
Oh, the same afternoon.
The same. I met Willie and Fred and made the date that morning. And well, I used to, you know, I'd have so many dates and everything. I mean, people that asked me for dates, I didn't say I went out with them, but they'd ask me for dates. And one time I told a major and a captain, I said, yeah, why don't you come by some Tuesday night? And by golly, Keith and I went to an old second-rate movie because Keith wanted to see it. We saw all the lights on in the house. What's going on? Somebody's visiting. We got there, and here's Major and the captain sitting there icing the champagne. They said, you said Tuesday night? And I'm telling you, I couldn't help but laugh. But, I mean, that's how many, you could go out with anybody you wanted to. There were so many men there. They had 3 bases there, you know. Well, anyway, so Jack came in, and he swung me around, grabbed me up and swung me around, and when I opened my eyes, it was Jack Sheridan. And he said, you're going out. He didn't call me Thelma, he always called me Elaine. I told him my name was Thelma Elaine, and he said, well, I don't like Thelma, I'll call you Elaine. And they called me Elaine at work. Same thing at work. The man said that hired me said, I don't like your first name, but I love your second name. So they called me Elaine. So Jack said, you're going out to dinner with me tonight. And I said, I can't. I have a date with a lieutenant. Thelma, they're a dime a dozen. You're going out with me. And I said, well, Jack, I can't. I said, I've got to date with this lieutenant and this captain, and I'm going to keep it. Well, you're not. You're going, and he wouldn't take no for an answer, so he followed me. He said, called a cab. I said, I have to go home. And if I'm going out to dinner with you, I have to go home and dress and everything. So anyway, he got a cab, and we went home, and of course, I called Keith and told her, I said, Keith, be sure Joan has all her toys picked up. I said, because I'm bringing a congressman home. Well, Keith got so excited, she got all dressed up. That I was brave. So while I'm in taking a shower, getting ready to go out to dinner with Jack, I told Elaine, I said, now look, when the captain and the lieutenant comes along, I want you to bring them out here. Because I have to go out to dinner with Jack. He's an old friend, and so on and so forth. And so we went to the Columbia restaurant. And so we're having dinner and everything, and we're talking and having a good time. And I said, you know, they have a party for you tonight. He said, yeah, well, you're going to go. And I said, Jack, lied to him. I can't go. I said, you know, if you work for the hotel, you're not allowed to go and mingle with the guests upstairs. Well, you're my guest. It's my party, and if I want to take you, I'm going to take you. Well, anyway, right when we were going to have coffee and some dessert, I said, I have to go to the powder my nose. So that meant you had to go to the bathroom, you know. So anyway, I went over and called Elaine, and I said, has the lieutenant and the captain got there? And she said, yeah. And I said, bring them on down to the Columbia restaurant, which was the restaurant to go to in St. Petersburg. Anyway, she brought them down. And right away, Jack and Fred started. He was telling Fred what was going on over in Guadalcanal, and your dad would say, well, Congressman, that's not right. You know, you're sitting up there in Congress, you don't know what's going on. I know what's going on. I'm the one that's got shot at, and so on and so forth. And what your dad did get shot at. He got shot in the arm, and he was so mad that he landed his airplane and ran and jumped into another airplane and took off. And he really mowed him down because, you know, he was one of the most highly decorated officers in the Air Force. That's why everybody wanted his papers, and the Air Force Academy has all his records and everything. And the University of Wyoming, you know, they have all his papers. Well, anyway, Jack and Fred didn't like each other. And so Jack told Fred and Willie, of course, they were in their dress uniforms. They could go to any place like that. Jack said, well, we'll take the girls home and let them get their formals on, and we'll go to my party. And I said, Jack, I'm not going to your party. And so Fred and Willie said, oh, we couldn't go. And, you know, and Elaine said, oh, I have nothing to wear, which she had plenty to wear. Anyway, so Jack says, well, I have to get back because I have to get dressed for the party. So we took him, instead of us taking a cab, which we did over to Ebo City in Tampa for the Columbia restaurant. We took Jack back, and Willie and Fred had rented a car. And we took him back to the hotel, and I'll tell you, he was so mad at me. Anyway, he was furious. Well, so Fred and I kept, we went to St. Petersburg from Tampa, which wasn't very far away. And we went to a place where they had bubbles like they do out here at the Roaring Twenties. I guess that's why I like the Roaring Twenties. They have all those bubbles, you know. And we went out there, and it's kind of like an open pavilion type thing. And we danced, and your dad was the best dancer. And of course, I love to dance. I still do. But he was so good at dancing, and we just hit it off, just really. And then before we left, of course, we didn't drink anything, and they didn't either, Coca-Colas. And then we got back to where Keith lived, and there was a big orange down at the end of the street. It looked like an orange, but you got hamburgers and stuff like that. And we went in there and had, well, they served outside, you know, tables outside. And we had hamburgers and all that type of thing, and then they took us home. And of course, then I had another date with Fred. I had a date with Fred every night until he left. And when he left, he asked me if I'd wait for him. And I thought,
So wait for him, does that mean?
He was already signed up for China.
Yeah, but I mean,
Then
will you wait for me? Does that mean, will you marry me?
Oh, yeah. So then he
So
left
how did he propose to you?
Went to Bartow, Florida. So I didn't just see him for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I saw him all summer. And when he left, he said, will you marry me? Will you wait for me? And I said, yes, I will. Because, you know, a lot of the guys put pressure on you, but he never did. And so I thought, this man is like a clean, fresh drink of water, and I'm not going to give him up. And because, you know, you'd go out with somebody, and if they tried to neck and pet you and all that kind of stuff, well, I used to get inside the door and lock the screen, and I'd say goodnight to him and kiss him goodnight. Oh.
So what? So when he went off back to war, how long did you work at the Tampa Terrace?
Until Keith moved to St. Petersburg. And so when I went to St. Petersburg with her, there again, I worked at the Tides Hotel. And I met tons of people over at the Tides Hotel. I met Myrna Loy, and she had 2 great big dogs. And I was the only girl that worked for the hotel that lived among the guests. And when we had anybody important, well, they called me. I was kind of the hostess for the hotel, but I also had the dining room. And I also had to do the bookkeeping for the dining room and all, for the food and everything. It was quite a job, but they paid me real good. I met Lowell Thomas and his family. He was a good-looking man. He was a news commentator. And they had a young son, and they used to call me after I went down and greeted them and showed them the hotel and all the facilities and everything. Then they asked me to have dinner with them, which I told them, you know, that I'd have to wait. Couldn't do that, but I could see them later, or I could meet with them in the afternoon. And so I went swimming with them and their son, and he had a big fat wife, but he was handsome and everything. He was very attentive to her, and the son, I don't know how old he was. I guess he was probably my age or maybe a little older. And by this time, your dad had already gone. He'd gone to China, but he wrote to me every single day, and I dated. The first year he was gone, I didn't date anybody. And then different people would say, oh, he might not come back, and here you sitting not doing anything and all that kind of stuff. So then I started going out with different people, but I never really got serious with anybody. And then he wrote and told me he was coming in through Miami.
But wait, didn't you stop getting letters for him for a while?
Yeah, but that was in Miami.
Oh, in Miami?
Yeah, he told me he was coming home earlier. And so Keith was in Miami by this time. So anyway, I worked for the Tides Hotel, and then I met the Clark Candy Bar people. And they opened a big country club with a golf course and a big dining room and, you know, the works and everything. And so they kept wanting me to come to work for them. And so gee, when I think about going to work for them, I couldn't believe that they wanted me to work for them, but I did go to work for them. And the dining room was huge, and I ordered all the tablecloths and the napkins, and I decorated the whole place. They didn't pay me for that. Now that I think about it, you know. Anyway, I decorated the place. I've had big palm trees as you know, go in the door and everything, and pictures on the wall, and they told me, don't spare any expense, and I didn't. And I sent out invitations to come, you know, to the opening of it, and to all the elite people around in St. Petersburg. And then I got a letter that your dad was coming back. It was a big job, and I'll tell you, it was a headache. Of course, the other place was a headache too, because after we closed, I had to take the tides. Well, during the time at the tides, I forgot to tell you, there was a man across the street that designed bathing suits for actresses. He lived in Hollywood, but then he moved to Florida, and he lived right across from the Tides Hotel. His name was Ermy, and so Ermy designed bathing suits for Paulette Goddard and all those old movie actresses. And so he used to get me to model his bathing suits. I must have had 10 of his bathing suits that I would model around the Tides Hotel. And then I had, then I had people like Roger Addington. He was a big wheel. I can't remember what all he did in St. Petersburg. But anyway, he wanted to he wanted me to open up my own coffee shop, my own place and everything. And he thought I was so good at it and everything like that, that he said, I'll finance it for you and you can pay me back. And he said, I financed a lot of football, a lot of kids to go to college. And he said, I'd like to finance it for you. His name was Roger Addington. And then I thought, if I get tied down with a business and Fred gets back,
Yeah.
So I turned him down.
When did you were modeling for a while during that same time, weren't you?
Yeah.
When did you do the one that was in, didn't you do a spread that was in Look magazine?
I did, I used to model for different people. I went to the shipyard and I modeled for I think it was in National Geographic, and I lost that too. It was the modern girl at the shipyard. Don't you remember I have some pictures around where I'm climbing into a crane and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it National Geographic?
I think it was. And then I modeled bathing suits. And then I used to model for this artist. And I had all those pictures, and I don't know what happened to them. I lost most of them.
Well, tell me about when you went to work for the Kitty Davis nightclub.
Oh.
Airliner.
Okay. That was something, too. Your dad wrote and told me he was coming through Miami. Well, Keith, by this time, wanted me to come to Miami. And so...
Had the war ended yet?
No. Oh, no. And so he told me he was coming through. Well, I hadn't heard from him, and I hadn't heard from him, so I decided, well, I'll just go on down there. Keith's there. Well, I wasn't there any time at all before Keith decided, Keith had heard, well, her husband was in the war too, And so he was in the Battle of Normandy, and he told her to move to Mobile. So she picks up and goes to Mobile, and here Fred's going to come through. So there again, I look in the paper, and there's a job with Kitty Davis's nightclub. And Elaine decided she's going to stay with me. So she stayed. And I got a job, and I don't know whether she got a job or not. But anyway, I decided, well, I can play on the beach in the daytime, and I'll work at night. That'll take care of my nights. So I did that.
Was it called Kitty Davis Airliner or something?
It was called Kitty Davis's Airliner.
Was she big? She used to be a big singer or something like that?
She, I don't know, she was a very beautiful woman, but it was the nightclub in Miami during those days. And
had a big stage and everything?
Oh, yeah, and they paid their entertainers a lot of money. Of course, when you paid an entertainer $300 a week, that was a lot of money for them. And so I used to be, now I wasn't the head bookkeeper, but I was the assistant bookkeeper. And then the assistant bookkeeper had to go out and take, when the hat check girl had the night off, I'd take her place. And when the cashier had the night off, main cashier, I had her place. So I got to go out in the crowd, which I love because I got to watch the shows and everything. But during the shows, time the shows were on, Aggie and I then Aggie and I, after Elaine left and went home.
Aggie's the bookkeeper?
Yeah, she was a school teacher. A lot of the girls during the summer, would come to Miami and pick up a job during the summertime. So Aggie and I became very good friends, and so we moved in together to a place called Haddon Hall. Anyway, during that time that we both worked at night, we both played around on the beach in the daytime, and we got our evening meal, and we went to work. But gee, I had people come in and interview me then, wanting to know what I was doing as a hat check girl and how come I wasn't in the show and all that kind of stuff, which I thought was funny. And they'd always write up, that raven hair beauty that checks hats.
Did they in the paper?
Yeah, in the paper. And Danny Davis came out and said, "What are you trying to do? Steal the stuff or something like that?" And I said, "I didn't have anything to do with that."
He was Kitty Davis's husband?
Yeah, Danny. Anyway, Kitty Davis liked her scotch. And so she'd come in and she'd say to me, "I want you to get me a scotch and water," because Danny wouldn't let her have it, because apparently she got drunk at night or something, I don't know. Anyway, she said, "You'll have to get it for me and order it from the waiter and put it in your drawer." And Aggie said, "If Danny Davis catches you doing that, he'll fire you." And I said, "Well, what am I going to do? She's in here wanting me to do it." So, anyway, I did. I'd order her drinks, and then she'd tell me, she'd say, "I'm putting on a show at my house for the guys in the hospital." And she never invited Aggie. Of course, Aggie was kind of plain. But every Sunday, she would invite me, and she had these portable dance floors, and she'd have all these guys in wheelchairs and everything. And so I had to go to Kitty Davis's home, which was mammoth and beautiful, and she'd have her orchestra out there. And I had to dance with these fellas and, go around to the wheelchairs and be nice. It was nice, and I didn't mind. And because I didn't work on Sunday nights. And I don't know if the club was closed or whatever. But she always had me there, and she had her showgirls there.
So she would come by and she'd slip into the back room, into the bookkeeper room, and drink scotch all night, huh?
Well, not all night, but I got her at least 3 drinks. 3 or 4. But Danny would come out and ask me, well, he knew somebody was getting her drinks, and he'd say, "Are you girls getting her a drink?" And we'd look wide-eyed, and I don't know anything about it.
Well,
God.
Didn't you, is that where you met Howard Hughes?
Yeah, I forgot about him. That's where I met Desi Arnaz, too. Howard Hughes came in, and he had on a pair of sneakers and an open shirt and everything in this nightclub. And they, you were supposed to wear a coat and a tie. But anyway, he came in and he wanted to cash a check for $1,000 or $2. And when I looked at the check, it said Howard Hughes, and I thought, ye gods. And I looked at him, and he had on a white shirt and slacks and sneakers. He was a real good-looking man. And so Aggie was out, so I said, "Well, you'll have to wait a few minutes." And so anyway, then Aggie came in and she looked at the check, and she said, "Well, we'll have to call Mrs. Davis." So Mrs. Davis came in, and she knew who he was right away, and she went, "Oh, Howard, darling, how are you?" And he said, "Well, I just want to take the showgirls to dinner." So he had all the showgirls for dinner. So I said to Aggie, "I guess you better cash the check." So we didn't get to know Howard Hughes, but we did see him, and we did cash a check for it. But anyway, it was a short time later that your dad came in.
Well, wait, one more story that I like about the Kitty Davis nightclub is
It's
the one
about
about
Desi Arnaz.
Well, no. Well, tell me about Desi Arnaz. You went and met him at a party later on, right?
Well, I met Desi Arnaz, and he wanted us to go out, me to go out on a party with him. And so, of course, the showgirls were invited too, and this was over at Kitty Davis's house again. And so I said, okay, I'd go. Well, anyway, as it turns out, I was going riding in the car with Desi Arnaz. And so we got there, and he tried to, in the kitchen, tried to push me up against the wall and kiss me. And I said, "Oh, go away." I said, "You're married to Lucille Ball." But we went swimming, and he chased me around the swimming pool. But anyway, that was funny.
Wasn't there another story about a stagehand that wanted to get a date with one of the singers, and he peed in her scotch?
Oh, you don't want me to tell that?
Yeah, well, that's a good story.
Well, she thought that she was so above them that, and she always drank a couple scotches before she went on the. She's the one that we paid $300 a week to. And when Desi Arnaz came in, Danny Davis tried to hire him, and he'd come out in this broken English. Can you imagine him wanting to pay me $300 a week? Why, I'm going back to Hollywood and make it big, which he did. But anyway, so these people that followed Jerry, her name was Jerry, she'd drink a couple scotches before she'd go out, but she was a terrific singer. She was a pretty blonde, and she wore these dresses that were skin tight, you know, all the way down her figure, and she would twist like this while she sang, and I loved to watch her because she was so good. But anyway, so this guy came out and he said, "Well, she thinks she's so much better than we are, so I decided I'd pee in her scotch." I said, I was afraid to tell Jerry because I knew that I'd get in it and I'd probably get shot. So I kept all that to myself, and that's when I was out doing the hat checking, and I thought that was a riot. And not only that, but Danny Davis thought that everybody was stealing from him, you know. And so when I went out, of course, all the tips went into a jar. I never got the tips. I got a lot of big tips, but I never got to keep them. But the other hat check girl, he thought she was stealing. And I guess she did put a few bucks down a stocking or something, but shoot, I don't know.
So what happened? So Dad what happened? Didn't the Dad's letters stop coming all of a sudden?
Oh yeah, they stopped coming. Yeah, for about 3 months. 2 or 3 months, and I thought he was dead. And that's the part I forgot. Anyway, I was so disgusted and everything that I was going to join the Air Force too. They had been after me. A girl kept coming in and showing me how cute she looked in her uniform and all that type of thing. And she told me that, you know, I could do bookkeeping and clerical work and stuff like that. And she had me convinced, and I had already gone down. And I thought your dad was dead, and I thought, well, shoot. You know, I wasn't in love with anybody or didn't owe anybody or anything, so I was going to join the Air Force. And, of course, this one girl was about 24, 25 years old, and she was a recruiter. So I had already gone down, took the test, made a real high mark on the test, and all I had to do the next day was go down and put my fingerprints on the thing and sign my name, and I would have been in the Air Force. And that night, before I was to go put my fingerprints on that, Mama called me and she said, "Fred is back."
No, I thought you got a letter from Willie Hull or something.
Well, that was afterwards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I did get a letter from Willie Hull, and he said that that Fred hadn't been hearing from me. During that time, it was V-mail, you know. And he said, "My buddy hasn't been hearing from you." And he said, I kept that letter for years too, and how I lost all that stuff, I don't know. And I kept that letter and I read it to Fred a couple of times. My buddy hasn't heard from you, and he's in love with you, and if you don't write to him, I'm going to look you up and personally beat you up.
So that's how you knew he was still alive?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, no?
I must have gotten that letter, I don't know, Gary. I either got that letter before we got married or after we got married. It was before we got married I got that letter. But anyway.
So your mom called you and said.
Well, evidently I must have gotten the letter after. I don't remember. Must have been sometime before the 3 months. It was before. Fred wasn't getting any letters from me, but I wasn't getting any letters from him either. And I had sent him a picture, and it went all around the. He was looking for me on Life magazine, you know. And then some girl came in. I tried on the suit to wear for Life magazine, and it was one of those fishnet suits that laced up the side, and it was just the little panties and the bra. And the seat hung like that in the seat, so I didn't get to wear it. Some big tall blonde got it. And so Fred kept, the last letter I'd gotten from him said, I didn't see you on Life magazine, because I told him I was going to be on Life magazine. Anyway.
So how did he get your mother's number to call to tell him?
Well.
Somehow he had your mother's number, and so she called and said that he was coming. He was
on his way to Florida. That he had called, and she told him that I had said that he was coming in through Miami, and I was waiting for him. He came in through Maine, and I called back that night, and he was out with his old girlfriend Nellie. That he had gone the whole time he was in college. He had dated Nellie for about 6 years or something like that. Every summer he dated Nellie. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, he didn't tell Nellie he was coming down to marry me. And so he came down. Mama said that he was on his way down to Pascagoula, and she told him on the phone I was in Miami, waiting for him. And he said, well, I didn't come in through Miami. I came in through Maine. So then he came on down to Miami, and I said to her, oh, I'm so glad you called. I said, because I was supposed to go over and give him my fingerprints, and I would have been in the service, and that's how close I would miss being in the Air Force. And
so anyway, so how did he, when did you finally see him?
I saw him as soon as he flew down to Miami.
Did you pick him up at the airport?
No, I didn't pick him up at the airport. He told me, he called, and I was nervous as a cat, and I told all my girlfriends, I don't want anybody around now when he comes. And so I was up on the second floor, and I could see him coming with his overnight bag, you know, those B-12 bags. And so everybody was down in the lobby. All my friends were down in the lobby. And I said, I don't want any of y'all around when he comes. I want to meet him by myself. So I saw him, and I was so excited. I ran down 3 flights, and I met him right at the door, right in the lobby where everybody was waiting. And I met him, and everybody just clapped. Everybody clapped and everything, and he turned around and he said, what's this? And I said, I told him not to. I wanted to meet you by myself. And they all went, because they all knew he was coming in, and they all knew I was waiting for him. And so they were all there, and then as soon as he came in, and we talked and everything. The next day we went and got the blood test, and
oh, really? So you hadn't seen him in 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And and y'all where did y'all get married, in Miami?
We got married in Miami because he only had a short time left that he had for redistribution, and so we had to report into California. And that was a long ways from Florida, so this Jewish girlfriend of mine arranged the whole thing. And so we had about 20 people for dinner. Mm-hmm. And you should have seen the church. And I didn't have time to get an outfit together. I raced out that day. Instead of going to have my fingerprints, I raced out that day, and I got that beautiful hat, and I got the dress and everything to match, and the shoes. But I didn't have time to get a wedding gown or any of that type of thing. So anyway, they all...
he wore his uniform?
Yeah, he wore his uniform. And right after that, they took those pictures of us. And then we got married at one of the seems like to me in the Navy Chapel or something like that, Air Force Chapel, right there on Miami Beach. And all these friends of mine that I had accumulated through work and in the hotel and everything like that. A lot of people lived in the hotel that we got to know, Aggie and I. So, and the girl that I work with that is standing with us, she was she was the hat check girl.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Who's the guy that was his best man?
That was a doctor.
Friend of yours or friend of his?
No, it was a friend of the priest.
Oh, really?
I mean, I didn't know any of those fellas. I mean, I didn't know anybody to be best man. I mean,
so then, so where did you spend your honeymoon night?
You know, I can't remember. Seems like we must have stayed in a hotel or something, but I don't remember.
And then you left for California?
Mm-hmm.
And that was your first station?
Mm-hmm.
Marchfield, is that right?
Oh no, we had to go to where they have Disney World now. What is the name of that place?
Oh,
But listen, we took an airplane, we took a bus, and we took a train to get there. And we spent... Anaheim, that's where we went. Anyway, we spent, well, on this bus and this train and everything like that. We spent a whole night in El Paso. We flew to El Paso. And we got bumped for some congressmen that were carrying their golf clubs and everything. And we sat there, and here Fred had been in Guadalcanal getting shot at. And we got bumped for these people, VIPs. And we sat in that bus station, that airport all night long trying to get out. So the next day they told us there was no flight, so we had to take I think a bus or something like that. Well, we took a bus, we took a train, we finally got to Anaheim. And the priest met us. And he said, Major, your dad was a major when we got married. He said, there's no room for your wife. And you know what your dad's favorite word was? Judas Priest. So he got off and he said to me, you stay here on the bench. And he went in, and so we got into an old second-rate hotel because it was so close, he had to go in the next day and check in. Well, anyway, in this old hotel, second-rate hotel that the priest finally got for us a room, the bed, we got in bed and it went in like that, and he hung his uniform all ready to report in for duty in the closet, and I had just his slacks and his little flight cap and a shirt in my suitcase. And so the next morning we got up and the toilet upstairs had overflowed and it wet his uniform all up, and he went, oh my God, Judas Priest. Here we took a plane, we took a bus, we took a train, and now look at my uniform. And I started laughing, Gary. I laughed until I thought I'd die. I just laughed and laughed and laughed. And so he said, you sure pick a fine time to laugh. And I said, well, it's all so funny. I said I could do either one. I said I could sit down and cry, or I could laugh. And I just laughed. And so then I got out my little traveling iron, and I pressed up his pants and his shirt and his flight cap. And it was California, so he had to report in that.
How long did y'all stay in Anaheim?
We stayed long enough for him to, about a week or something like that. And that's where we had our honeymoon, in Anaheim. Boy, we'd get out on the beach and the waves were so strong, we'd hold each other's hand like that. The waves were so strong it would push us up on the shore. And but anyway, it was all a lot of fun.
Where did you go after Anaheim?
Let's see, our first station was Port Sam Houston.
Here. Where did you, I thought, didn't you buy?
No, we had to go to Louisville for some reason. We went to Louisville. Now, I don't know what we went to Louisville for. But anyway, So while we were right next to a mortuary. And
We're in Louisville?
Yeah. But, you know, you couldn't get in a hotel hardly. I mean, during this time, while we were out at, when we first got to Einaham, the war was over. It was, see, he got home just before the war was over.
Yeah.
And a couple enlisted men tried to pick a fight with him and all that type of thing. And, but he brushed them off. But anyway, here I got into that room, and we got into this room, and he had to go someplace on a flight. He had already checked in, and they already had him going on a flight. And then we found out that we had to come to Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas, for redistribution. And we got here, and believe it or not, the same thing happened. We got here, and they had a big convention in town, and we couldn't get a room in a hotel in town. And so there again, we had to stay in a second-rate hotel. So the next day, Fred says, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to look for an apartment. And so we looked for an apartment in the paper, and it was on the south side of town, which then, you know, the north side wasn't even developed. What am I saying? Anyway, we looked in the paper, and this woman that had the apartment for rent was Inez Etheridge. And she had this cute little brick house and everything. And it was over at Highland Park. And so we moved in with, she said, well, her apartment was, they hadn't vacated or something like that. And so if I didn't mind, we could stay with her. She had an extra bedroom. So we stayed with Inez, and we both loved Inez. She was just so friendly and sweet and everything like that. And so we stayed with her, and her aunt moved in the apartment that we were to get. And so
Inez lived by herself?
Yeah. Her son was in the war. He was in the Navy.
Is she a widow?
Yeah, and he looked just like Van Johnson. Anyway, Jack Etheridge is a doctor over in Corpus. And I ought to contact Jack and Inez. Anyway, after we came to San Antonio, you know, when we moved back here, we took Inez to one of Greg's football games.
She was still alive, huh?
Yeah, Anyway, after I got pregnant, I guess I had Sherry 11 months after I was married. So they took care of me the whole time. But by this time, we had already moved in the apartment. And
so was Dad home when you went into labor for the first time?
Oh yeah, yeah, he was here.
And y'all drove to the hospital at Fort Sam Houston.
Yeah. And then the doctor and I used to go to see the doctor there, and he was a redhead, and so and of course I was a brunette, and he used to make a bet with me and he said, "What color is your husband's hair?" And I said, "Blonde." "Well, I'll bet you, he'd kid with me. I bet you it's going to be a redhead." And I just laughed. Well, then when Sherry was born, she had this red fuzz on her head, and I couldn't believe it. And so I had a milkman, and he had one green tooth right in front, and redhead and freckle face, and he delivered my milk. So it was kind of a standard joke. They'd say, "Where'd the kid get the redhead?" And I'd laugh, and I'd say, "Well, I can't decide whether from the milkman or the doctor." And it was just a joke.
Yeah.
Well, one time I heard Sherry tell that, and to Kitty Pharisee, and I was in the bathroom in Colorado Springs, and I went out. She said, "Where'd you get your red hair, Sherry?" And I overheard her say that, and I went out, and I bawled her out, and I said, "That was just a family joke." I said, "My grandmother's sister was redhead," and I said, "and I had a redhead sister," and I said, "That's a family joke." And so I said, "I don't ever want to hear you say that again." Isn't that awful? But anyway, I had 4 children in 5 years.
Where did y'all go from San Antonio?
Marchfield, California.
Is that where Charles was born?
Yes.
It wasn't Charles?
No, Charles was born in Mobile, Alabama. About this time, where did your father go? Oh, from Marchfield, from Fort Sam Houston, we went to Marchfield. And I was going to have Charlie, and your dad had to go to Florida to get an instrument card, an advanced instrument card. And so I was pregnant with Charlie, and there's where Robin Olds, and he was married to Ella Raines. And so we met them down there. And then, of course, he was stationed at Marchfield, too. He had to go for his instrument card, too. They were both majors. And he used to bring Ella Raines to the Officers Club to dance and everything like that. She was a movie actress.
Oh.
And she was Claude Rains' daughter. And she was real pretty. And they had 2 children. And as far as I know, I heard that she was an alcoholic. But then he became head of the Air Force Academy. He turned up to be a general. I think his father was a general too, which probably helped. And
so y'all went from Marchfield to. Why did you move back to? You moved back to Mobile?
No, we didn't move back to Mobile. I went with Fred, and we lived in Sherry was just real little. You know, she had her first birthday there. Didn't you ever see the pictures where she's digging into a cake and everything like that? And she had her first birthday, and I dressed her in an old bathing suit and put a scarf around her head, one of my bathing suits. And we used to do all kind of silly things. And then found out I was going to have Charlie, and that was Charlie and Sherry. She was a year old in July, and I had Charlie in August. So they're just 13 months apart. And then we went to, about this time, where did we go? We went back to Marchfield, and one of Fred's friends talked him into going to the National Guard. And so I was pregnant with Greg and drove all the way to Wisconsin from California. And I remember being so sore and everything, and I had Greg there in Buffalo, New York. That's where he was born.
That's when y'all moved to Buffalo next?
Yeah, and Fred was in the National Guard for a couple of years and everything, and then he realized that he was being away from the Air Force. So then I think we went to Connecticut, Rhode Island, and that's where I had Susie. And so then that was...
So you had 4 children in 5 years.
Yeah, can you imagine? But during that time, I mean, you know, I didn't use any birth control or anything like that. And
well, didn't you tell me that you and Dad had both talked it over in the...
Yeah, we talked, and we said we were going to have at least... I said I want at least 5 children, because I'm from a big family, and we always had so much fun and everything. And he said, well, I have a big family too. I'm from one of 7, and we always had a good time. So anyway, we just took our children as they came along. So, you know, it was, and I enjoyed the kids and all that type of thing when y'all all babies, and it was like a job to me. I'd get up early in the morning and feed you, and after that I'd put you on the toilet when you could sit up, and by the time you were a year old, you were completely trained. And when you had to go to the bathroom, and I just, you know, after each meal I'd put you on. And not only that, but your dad used to get up in the middle of the night and put you on when you were asleep and tell you to wet. I wouldn't get up, but he did. And
so where did y'all go from Buffalo? Y'all went to Rhode Island.
Rhode Island when I had Susie. And then it seems like to me after I had Susie, we went to Otisfield, Massachusetts. And
where is it?
Susie was a baby.
Is that where you, didn't you have a maid named Iggy? Is that one?
Higgy, right. In Rhode Island we had Higgy. And she was really a nice old gal. She'd babysit, and she did my housework in the daytime and all that type of thing.
What did Dad say about Higgy?
Oh, he liked her. I mean, you know, and she'd babysit. And then...
no, didn't he? I thought you told me he used to say she was the ugliest woman.
He used to say she was the ugliest woman he'd ever seen. But she had a real handsome son, and he married a real nice gal. But Higgy was a widow, and she used to do housework. And so she lived in a little house behind us. And so, one day I asked her if she would do housework, just so I'd pay her a decent salary, and she didn't have to go out to, because it's hard to go from one house to the other.
Yeah.
And so she'd babysit for us, and we'd pay her extra for babysitting and stuff like that.
And then you didn't you move to Mobile again?
Yeah, but I didn't move. I moved to Mobile from Marchfield. Your dad went to Okinawa. Wait a minute. No, we were at Cape Cod then, and Susie was a baby. And then I got pregnant with Gail. And then your dad was sent to Okinawa. And so then I called Keith and Ralph, and I went to Mobile because Ralph and Keith helped me the whole time. And
so they helped you get a house, or?
Got me a house. And then Ralph used to help me go to I used to go to the commissary, and then on Saturday Ralph went to the commissary, so he'd drop by to find out if I needed anything and stuff like that. And if I had any problems, I used to call him, to come over. And then Elaine was supposed to take me to the hospital when I was going to have Gail. And I kept waiting for her. Of course, I lived right outside of Berkeley Air Force Base, and they lived way over on Marawina.
And was your mom with you?
Yeah, she came to stay with all the rest of the kids. And so then I kept waiting for Elaine, and I said to Mom, I can't wait any longer. So I picked up my suitcase, got in the car, drove myself to the hospital. Mama kept saying, you might have the baby on the way there. What are you going to do? And I said, I'm not going to have it on the way over there. And so I parked the car right in front of the hospital, got out, and you should have seen me carry that suitcase into the hospital. I got into the desk, and the woman said, I'll take you right to the delivery room. They took my suitcase. And they took my suitcase. You don't fill anything out until later. You usually got to fill out a form. And so then I had Gail. And the doctor came in and kidded me. It sure took a lot to knock you out. During those days, they just knocked you out.
So you were asleep during all of all the births of all your children?
Yeah. And then, no, I was awake with Jimmy. And then after I had Gail, 6 weeks later, your dad came home and we went to Okinawa.
So you flew to California. Where'd y'all leave? Y'all took a ship?
We didn't fly to California. Yeah, we did. No, we didn't either. We, I believe, we took the car with us to Okinawa.
Huh.
So we must have drove to California. I can't remember. We did drive to California, and then from California we got the ship and shipped our car with us, and we had it when we were over in Okinawa.
Huh.
And we got rid of it over in Okinawa, I believe.
So y'all had a house. Did y'all rent a house? Was it on base or off base?
It was on base, and I had 2 maids and a gardener. And the gardener took care of the kids on the outside. And I had 2 maids that took care of the house. So I really didn't have a whole lot of housework to do or anything like that. And then when we stayed over there, it was 30 miles an hour to down where Fred flew airplanes at Naha. And we used to go to the officers club down at Naha, and the maids took care of all the kids. And
Is this when Korean War was going on?
yeah. Yeah, that's right. Your dad flew over there a few times, and your dad had a squadron, and he was a colonel by then, lieutenant colonel. And then we came back from Okinawa, and we were stationed at Suffolk County Air Force Base on Long Island. And there again, they didn't have, they wanted us to live on the base, and they had these crackerback box houses. And I said, look, I have 5 children. I can't live there. So we lived in town in Riverhead. And then I got pregnant with Jimmy. And then I had a doctor in town by the name of Dr. Luce. And, you know, about this time, Susie had bad tonsils and I had to have them out. And Dr. Luce was really, he said, "Here, I treated you like a daughter." When I got pregnant with Jimmy, Teresa Seelig, Ben Deniseski's sister, wanted me to go to Dr. Luce. And they had a specialist there in town, but I had to go to old Dr. Luce because he had delivered most all the babies in town. And it was a good thing I did. I met a Dr. Davis because I did run into a lot of problem when I had Jimmy. And my water had broken about 3 months after I was pregnant in the middle of the night. And so, and I had old black blood that came out. And so, anyway, I went over to see Dr. Luce, and he said, well, he thought I was having a miscarriage, but a friend of his that was a big OBGYN doctor from Brooklyn was coming over. He was a classmate of his, and he wanted Dr. Davis to see me. So Dr. Davis was, well, he's written a lot of books. In fact, Carol Scholema told me that he had some of his books. And so I met Dr. Davis, and he examined me, and he told me that he thought that I could, that I was still pregnant with Jimmy, and he told me that when you first get pregnant, you have 2 walls, and there's fluid in between the 2 walls, and as the farther along you go, these walls close up together like this, and it becomes one real strong wall that you have the baby in. And he thought the water in between. In the meantime, I had a rabbit's test, and Jim was still alive. So Dr. Davis told me that if I ran into any problem, that he would be handy. He would come, and he was living on Long Island, that he would come and take care of me. So he said, "Now don't you worry. You don't, you know, I'll be standing by." And I said, "You know, during this time," I said, "Well, you know, supposing something serious happens." Well, then I had Jimmy, and nothing serious happened except I had terrible hemorrhoids, and I was in a lot of pain and everything. But they iced me up, and
That was in Riverhead, New York, or?
yeah, in Riverhead. And then the Deniseskis, they're Jim's godparents, and I still haven't told Jimmy that Mr. Deniseski died. And I'm always going to tell him, but somehow or another I never have told him. Anyway, I'm still friends with Ben, as you know, and
so then from there, where y'all went, you moved back to, or how long were y'all in Riverhead?
well, we were in Riverhead 4 years, and I think it was Riverhead that we went to. I got a little bit mixed up from Riverhead, because we came back from Okinawa to Riverhead, and then we went to Otis. No, we went to Otis first. From Riverhead, let's see, where did we go? Oh, from Riverhead, you know, I can't remember.
Well, sometime.
I know where we went. From Riverhead, we went to Colorado Springs.
Well, you made a stop in between and Mobile, because that's where I was born.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right.
Because
Wait a
Dad
minute.
went to Alaska for a while.
Yeah, from Riverhead, that's where your daddy went. From Riverhead, your dad went to Alaska. I should have written all this down for you before. He went to Alaska, and I was pregnant with you, and I remember one of the girls said, went to a tea, and one of the girls said to me, "It's none of my business, but," and I turned around and I said, "It isn't any of your business." That's when I was going to have you. She was going to say, "But don't you have enough children?" Anyway, I went to Mobile, and your dad went to Alaska. And so I had all these kids, and I was pregnant with you. And there again, Keith and Ralph helped me. And then your dad, I used to talk to him on a ham radio all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Where would you go to talk to him?
on the telephone.
Huh.
I talked to him on the telephone. And this guy in Mobile had a ham radio, and he would put your dad on,
Huh.
and I'd talk to him.
So y'all lived on Brookley Avenue, right?
Yeah. And I had a maid, you know, that came in once a week to help me with the housework and everything, but I didn't have a maid every day. And I had my ups and downs, like Greg fell on his head and all that kind of stuff. And then
Where Susie got her head split open on the hit with the swing.
that was in Mobile when I was going to have Gail. Yeah. When I was pregnant with Gail and Susie. Charles and Greg went to the nursery school, and when they'd come home, I'd go get them, and I had this big outdoor swing set, and I was expecting Mama to come over, and Susie toddled outside, and I was right behind her, and I tried to grab her when they came back and hit her in the head. And I picked her up and was running with her to the front door, and the doctor next door was a dentist, and he took me over to the hospital with Susie with her head all split open. So I could really write a book about all my ups and downs with my children.
What about didn't
And doing the
Gail put the car in reverse one time?
Oh yeah, in Riverhead.
What happened?
I was taking Jimmy to the hospital, and Gail was about 3, because she's 3 years older than. And I put her in, and I had Jimmy sitting outside, and she climbed over in that station wagon and put it. Your dad told me to be sure and heat up the car before I put Jim in because it was so cold out. I turned around to get the bassinet to put it in the car, and Gail put the car into reverse, and the car shot out the driveway. We had a long driveway, and turned around a couple times on this busy street, or Roanoke Avenue, and landed up in the other woman's yard. And here I'm standing there, put Jim down, and I ran down after, tore all the hide off of my knees.
Fell down?
And when it came out in the paper that I had left the car running, had gone upstairs to get Jimmy, which wasn't true. I was right there. All I had to do was turn around and put Jim in the car, and Gail and made me like an idiot. Anyway, when we were on Riverhead, New York, your dad used to take care of his enlisted men every Friday night. And I used to say to him, well, with all these children and everything, I'd say to him, next Friday night I'm going to be the first guy in line, because they'd bring all his problems, you know, to him. And he'd help solve their problems. And he'd say, you can take care of it. God, I'm telling you, I must have been a whiz. I used to take care of the kids, get everybody fed, and get everybody ready for bed, and all that type of thing, and still entertained at night, have people over for dinner.
Well, I can remember when we lived in Sherman, and we had all 7 of us were living there, and well, I guess Susie or Sherry maybe was just leaving to go to college, and we had a long table, and all of us would sit around it, and I think the milkman actually would come to our house every other day with like 9 half-gallons of milk.
Well, the milkman didn't come. We got it at the commissary.
Oh.
Well, there are a few things I've left out about Perrin Air Force Base and all that type of thing.
Well, we
but
went to, after I was born, we went to,
what time is it?
it's 5:15.
Keith's going to be here at 6. Anyway, you aren't going to show him this.
No.
Where are you going to show it?
Well, I'm going to give it out to everybody at Thanksgiving.
Are you?
Yeah, we'll make copies for everybody and give it to them at Thanksgiving.
Well, anyway, at Perrin, where did we...
Well, we went to, I was born in Mobile, Alabama.
And then when your dad came home from Alaska, he did come home for your birth.
He did.
Yeah, he was there for your birth a day ahead of time. Yeah, I think it was just a day ahead of time. And when I was on the table, I guess I had you at Berkeley. And when I was on the table there, there was a civilian doctor on duty. I had you on the weekend. And I guess I died on the table, because when I came to in my room, he came in and he said, he bawled me out. I'm not going to say what he said. You want me to say what he said? God damn you. We almost lost you. You died on the table. But I didn't have any death experience or anything that people say. Evidently I wasn't out that long, because they brought me to. And I didn't recall anything like that. I don't recall when you were born or anything. And all I remember was coming home with you. And all the kids were real excited about it.
Yeah, wasn't Jim mad? He was in the car when, you know.
Oh, yeah, when I brought you home. Yeah, your dad stayed a few days after that until I came home. And Jim was in the car, and he was real mad because, see, he was the baby. And I forgot about that. He was real mad because I had a new baby. And he wouldn't look at you. He's 3 years older than you, isn't he?
3.5.
3.5. He wouldn't look at you or anything. We'd say, look at your little brother. He wouldn't look at you.
He still does that.
What?
Just like Jared does.
Yeah, he wouldn't look at you. But that was funny that you remember that. I didn't remember that.
He says it's because they left him in the car when Dad went in to bring you out of the hospital.
Well, but he wouldn't look at you. I forgot that. I'll swear.
And
but there's a lot of things that, you know, that when I was going to have Gail, Greg broke his leg. And anyway, I had to carry Greg around every place I'd go. I'd have to take Greg. He was 3 years old, and he broke his leg an inch above his ankle. And here I had this big stomach with having Gail, and had to carry this leg of Greg's around while he hopped. And one time, Father Carroll was over. He used to come over to see us, you know, how we were doing and everything. And he was a good friend of Keats. And so the TV man was there, and I was busy with the TV man and everything. And Greg kicked Father Carroll, and I turned around. Father Carroll had him across his knees, spanking him, kicked him with that cast on his leg. And I said, how dare you spank my child? He said, well, he says, if he's going to kick me, I'm going to spank him. But anyway.
Didn't you tell me a story about Greg was real ugly one time when Dad was out of town, and you had a...
Oh, yeah, when we were in Colorado Springs. Well, your dad went to visit the Milhollands. Well, Milholland was with us down in Florida when they were all getting their instrument card. Anyway, Fran was a beautiful lady, and she and I were real good friends. And the guys were real good friends. And so, who was I going to have then? Charlie. Anyway.
You're talking about Colorado Springs when the guy came over.
Yeah, well, Fred was going to wherever they were stationed, I think in California. And so he called me from California, and he says, guess who I'm visiting? I'm visiting Fran and George Milholland. And I said, really? And he said, yes. And he said, and George is coming to Colorado Springs, and I want you to have him for dinner. So I set up the dining room table, because we used to all eat in the kitchen. You don't remember that because you were too little. But I had a table that was a door, and I had legs put on it and everything. Your dad did. And we had it, everybody ate breakfast and everything there. But if your dad wasn't home, we didn't eat in the dining room. We ate in the kitchen. And everybody sat around. We had a bench in the kitchen, you know, where 3 or 4 of you could sit on the bench. And so it was a lot more convenient because the sink was right there and everything. Because most of the time we ate all our meals in the dining room.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because I wanted y'all to learn good table manners and everything. And so, and somebody would always knock their milk over, and your dad would say, here we go again, mopping up the milk. Anyway, so I had the table all set and everything, and I served George a drink before dinner, and I had one. And so we had, I don't know, steak or roast beef, I think, roast beef. And so Greg came in and he said, well, what's that man coming in for dinner for?
How old is Greg?
In Colorado Springs? I don't really know.
Junior high?
Probably. About the 6th grade, 5th grade or something like that. 5th or 6th grade. And I said, that man, that colonel happens to be a good friend of your father's, and he asked me to have him over for dinner so he could meet all of you. Well, Greg was so ugly to him and was really jealous of him and everything. I should have another drink of water.
Okay, hold on.
Turn it off for a second.
Okay, we're back. Okay, well, tell me. I want to ask you. Tell me what. Tell me what my dad was like.
Well, your dad was a real fun-loving man, and we had a lot of fun. We used to go to the Officers Club every Saturday night, and we went to the Officers Club for dinner every Sunday when y'all were little.
Y'all get a babysitter?
Yeah, we had in New York, we had a lady by the name of Mrs. Stone, and if your dad was, I used to let all of you play with your toys. We had a sun parlor, and it was right off the living room, and that's where the TV was, and everybody would watch Howdy Doody and all that kind of stuff. And then I'd call Mrs. Stone if he was coming in. I'd call her and I'd say, "Oh, Mrs. Stone, Fred's bringing somebody in for dinner," and I said, "And the house has to be all picked up and everything, and I need somebody to watch out for the kids and put them to bed and help me." Because, it was hard to, I had babies and everything.
I don't remember, and even in Perrin, when you had 6 or 7 children at home, y'all entertained a lot.
Well, I know we entertained, but you see, that goes along with your job, more or less. And so...
Who was the disciplinarian? You?
Yep. Yeah, the only time your dad ever disciplined any of you is when he got angry. And then, he would, and during that time, I'd get mad at him because then, he'd get real mad. But no, I'm the one that said yes you can and no you can't. And as far as I can remember, I never beat any of you, never whipped you. But I did have a switch. When Charles and Greg would get to the table and start giggling and stuff like that, I'd get my switch off of the refrigerator, and I'd stand there and I'd switch their legs, with it. And of course, with a switch, it would sting.
Uh-huh.
And but as far as whipping you or anything, I never did.
And so, how long were y'all married when my dad died?
28 years.
28 years.
Your dad was only. See, my father died when he was 54. Your dad was just 57. Was going to be 57.
Yeah, that's right. And you got a call from Uncle Bob, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And
7 o'clock in the morning. And he said, "Thelma?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "This is Bob." And I said, "Oh." Well, before he died, he wanted to, we had decided that he was going to go back. You went with us the year before, you and Jim. You remember that?
Yeah.
We
Or
all
just
went
me?
to... No, Jim went too.
To where?
Elkhart Lake.
Oh, no, that was just me.
Was it just you?
Yeah. He stayed home with Ann, I think. Or I can't remember. Maybe.
I thought he went with us.
I don't think so. I think it was just you and I. And
we'll
Dad.
have to ask Jimmy. Because I thought y'all both had gone to Elkhart Lake. And we went there for your dad's reunion.
Yeah.
And, and Bob's kid kept getting real smart every time, And I was really ticked off.
Well, Aunt Jean was prodding him on
Oh,
the day.
sure. Jean never liked me. Never. And, of course, we were thrown together for the reunion and everything.
Yeah.
But
so Bob called you to...
she was always jealous of me. And,
Bob called you to break the bad news.
yeah, but what he said was, "Thelma," he said, "Fred had a heart attack." And I said, "Well, what hospital is he in?" "He's not in a hospital, he's dead." Well, I just went into orbit. But you see, the night before, everybody was out in the swimming pool, and we all got out of the swimming pool, and it was Father's Day.
That's right. I remember talking to him on the phone.
Yeah, and he said what a great time he had, and all that kind of stuff, and that he was at Lola's, and you know, and he had a real good time. He was with all the friends that he loved a lot, and he had a real good time before he died and all that type of thing. Well, I can.
Didn't you have a dream about him right after he died, or he came to you in a dream?
Yeah, I didn't have a dream. I think he appeared to me, and nobody can tell me it was a dream. At just before day in the morning, after he was gone a whole week, and just before day in the morning, I didn't know what my finances was going to be or anything like that. And about, I would say 5 o'clock, just before daybreak, he was standing at the foot of my bed, and he had on his gray suit, and his face was chalk color. And he said to me, Thel, he said, I don't want you to worry about a thing. Everything is going to fall into place. And I sat up like that, and when I did, he was gone. And I don't think that was a dream. I think that his spirit came back.
Well, y'all had a real happy marriage, didn't you?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So
we always had a good time, and
you were a widow for 10 years before you met Colonel Goodfleisch, Don Goodfleisch.
No, I wasn't a widow 10 years. I was a widow 8 years when we got married. I met Don, and I went around with Don. Aline Gunn introduced me to Don Goodfleisch. And Jane Dahlberg was getting married to Jack, and she had been a widow for years because General Dunning had died, and Jack was an old high school friend of hers. And so she was getting married, and I called and I said to her, listen, Jane, I said, I'm one of your oldest friends. I met her right after I got married. You're in San Antonio. Why don't I have a luncheon for you? And you give me a list of the people that you want to come. And I met Aline Gunn. And this time, Greg has already gotten his master's degree. And so he's working at SAC. He's teaching school at SAC. And so she said to me, honey, you mean to tell me you're a little old widow? And, you know, I thought I was old during that time. And when I stopped to think, I was the same age as Ann is, 51 or 2, when I was a widow. And because your dad was 4 years older than me. So anyway, I was 52, I guess, when he died. Anyhow, where was I?
Where you were inviting all the people over to luncheon for Ms. Dunn.
For Jane Dahlberg, and I met Aline Gunn, and so she invited me, she wanted me to come over to her house for dinner. And Greg had been painting the house over there, you know. And then Greg helped me with that luncheon, and everybody saw him, you know. And of course, Greg is an extremely handsome man. And Jean told me, she said, after Greg was here the last time, she said, you know, I didn't realize how good looking Greg is. Greg is good looking. I mean, you know, at a man's viewpoint, you wouldn't think he's good looking, but he is. All of you are good looking. Now, I've seen people that think you're the best looking in the family, and then I've known people that says Jimmy's the best looking, and then I've had people to tell me how much good looking Charlie is, and then Jean tells me that Greg is such a handsome man, and of course Betty Lancaster always thought Greg was really handsome. So anyway, so I just got a big kick out of Jean saying, you know, Thelma, I didn't realize how good looking Greg is. Well, so it, you know, all the fellas and the girls are nice looking too. Girls are real good looking girls. But anyway, so I met Eileen Gunn, and I was invited to her house for bridge. So I went over there to play bridge, and she came over and she said, "Honey, listen, I've got a man I want you to meet." She said, "His wife just died. This is in June now, in April." And I said to her, "Eileen, I don't want to meet anybody's wife who just died." I said, "He's still grieving." So anyway, she said, "Well, honey, somebody else is going to get him." I said, "Well, let him go to it. I don't care." I'd never met Dawn. So anyway, she had, if you remember this, she had another party in November. And so she had me hooked up with Doc Speed, and Dawn hooked up with Susan's last name, Susan, anyway, Susan. And so when we were sitting at the same table, and so Dawn kept talking to me, and Doc was talking to Susan, and this, that, and the other. And so the next day, Doc asked me for a date, and you were laying on the floor, and he came in to get me, to take me down to the tower for dinner, for lunch at least. And when I came back, you said, "Mother, why are you going out with that old man?" and I said, "Well," I said, "you know, we're just friends." And you said, "Well, you know, everybody that I went out with, y'all were afraid I was going to marry him or something." And you said, "Well, the same thing will happen like my dad, meaning he'll die and leave you too." So anyway, I went out with Doc, I think twice, and I thought, he drove 30 miles an hour downtown, and here this old man, well, he wasn't too old, I guess. You know, he was a lot older than me, and he was driving like this, you know, and I thought, oh no. And I can't go out with you, you're too slow. Anyway, so I didn't go out with Doc anymore, but he and Susan got together with Eileen Gunn's help, and they got married shortly after. And I think they had a pretty good marriage too. And then, well, I think time passed, maybe a couple months, and then Dawn, I'd see him at parties, and so finally Dawn said to me, "Hey," he'd call me on the phone, "Are you going to so-and-so's party?" And I'd say, "Yes." And he'd say, "Well, can I come by and pick you up and give you a ride?" Not a date, or just a ride. And I'd say, "Yeah, you can pick me up." So that went on for quite a while. And then there was a party down at Verna Brown's. She was Verna Brown then. She's Verna Ingram now. Anyway, so I got up enough nerve to ask him if he would like to go to the party with me. It was in the afternoon. It was New Year's Day. She always had this party. "No," he says, "I don't want to go." He said, "I'm going to a party tonight." I was going to another party